There are moments in royal history when the silence becomes louder than any spoken command. Moments when a sealed envelope, hidden in a drawer or locked behind a palace door, carries more power than a public speech or a televised announcement. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared the world for the moment Prince Philip's private letter was opened. Not even the people closest to him. Because inside that envelope was a message Philip intended to stay secret for years, maybe decades. A message he expected to be read only when the time was right, when the dust had settled, when the family could handle what was coming. A message revealing which grandson, William or Harry, he trusted with something far more personal than his royal duties or ceremonial legacy. His fortune. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But not just money, personal assets, private holdings, items of sentimental value. Wealth and heirlooms accumulated over a lifetime, protected across generations. And in his own handwriting, in a tone described by one witness as sharp, unmistakably deliberate, Prince Philip wrote something that would shake the monarchy. William have access to my personal fortune, not Harry. Why? That question is the spark that ignited the biggest royal mystery since the Queen's secret letters to the Commonwealth nations were locked away. Why would a grandfather, one known for discipline, precision, and clear thinking, make a decision this bold, this pointed, and this irreversible? Was it personal? Was it strategic? Was it something he saw coming long before the rest of the world? Or was it something Harry did or failed to do? These are the questions that have resurfaced like a wave crashing against the walls of Buckingham Palace. Questions that have divided royal watchers, historians, and even members of Philip's own extended family. But the true shock isn't the decision itself. It's the timing, the secrecy, the fact that this letter was intentionally sealed, not shared with the Queen, not handed to Charles, not discussed with advisors. Sealed, hidden, guarded, and only meant to be opened after Philip was gone, when no one could question him or ask for explanations. Think about that for a moment. If you wrote a private letter and sealed it away from everyone, even your spouse, what would compel you to do it? What level of certainty or concern would drive you to leave a message that could shift the balance of your family's future? That's why we're here. Because the opening of this letter didn't just create controversy. It opened decades of memories, old wounds, old disagreements, and long-buried fears that Prince Philip may have carried quietly while the world saw only the calm, disciplined, unwavering consort of Queen Elizabeth II. To understand this letter, you have to understand Philip. The man behind the uniform, the grandfather behind the stern face, the strategist behind the scenes. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't careless. He didn't make decisions based on emotion or sudden frustration. Every decision he made came from observation, analysis, and the ability to see several steps ahead, a skill sharpened long before he ever walked into a royal palace. So why this choice? Why William? Why not Harry? And why choose to deliver this message only after his death? The answer, as we'll uncover, stretches years into the past and reaches deep into the personal dynamics of the royals. It touches on William's upbringing, Harry's changing path, and Philip's growing concerns about the modern world and the direction of the monarchy. But before we dive into the reasons, let's return to the moment the letter was found, a moment that changed everything. Because the truth is, no one was expecting it. Not on that day. Not during that conversation. Not even in that room. There were no cameras, no journalists, no palace announcements. It was an ordinary afternoon, quiet and uneventful, when something extraordinary surfaced. Here's the strange part. The letter wasn't discovered by a historian or a royal archivist. It wasn't found inside a safe labeled with Philip's name or hidden in a chest of personal belongings. It was found by accident. A simple reshuffling of personal documents, a cleaning of a private space, an unexpected moment of curiosity, and suddenly, there it was. A sealed envelope with Philip's unmistakable handwriting. His initials. His unique, sharp-angled script. His personal wax seal. Imagine being the person who found it. Imagine seeing Philip's seal intact. Imagine the weight of that moment. Knowing you're about to open something he wanted hidden until after his passing. Would your hands shake? Would you hesitate? Would you wonder whether opening it would reveal something harmless or something explosive? That's the tension that filled the room that day. And when the envelope finally opened, slowly, carefully, almost ceremonially, silence took over. Reading the words inside wasn't simply reading a message. It was stepping into Philip's mind. It was stepping into years of private thoughts, private fears, private calculations. And at the center of it all was one clear instruction, written without hesitation. William have access to my personal fortune, not Harry. That dividing line, written in his own hand, became the spark behind today's story. But what made Philip write it? Why did he feel the need to be so specific? Why did he believe William should inherit these personal assets instead of splitting them between both grandsons, as many families would? The deeper you look, the more the question grows. Because hidden behind that decision is a story of trust, responsibility, tradition, disappointment, and prediction. Yes, prediction. Philip saw things unfolding long before they did. Not because he was psychic, but because he understood human behavior better than most people ever will. And whether you agree with his decision or disagree with it, one thing is clear. It wasn't made lightly. This was not a decision born out of anger or favoritism. This was a decision born out of concern. A concern Philip never voiced publicly, which raises a larger, more unsettling question. What did Prince Philip fear? Before we can answer that, there's something else you need to know, something most people overlook when they discuss this letter. Philip didn't just choose William. He excluded Harry. Those two actions are not the same. Choosing someone is positive. Excluding someone is intentional. Why did Philip feel the need to draw that hard boundary? The answer begins with a story. One almost no one talks about. A story from the 1990s. A story Philip never forgot. A story that set everything in motion. And once you understand it, the entire letter suddenly makes sense. There are days in royal history that feel perfectly ordinary right up until the moment they aren't. Days that begin with routine tasks, quiet conversations, and the slow, predictable rhythm of palace life, then suddenly crack open to reveal something that shifts the ground beneath everyone's feet. This is one of those days. The day Prince Philip's sealed letter was discovered did not begin with drama. There were no raised voices, no urgent calls, no suspicious gatherings. It started with something far simpler, tidying up. Not by cleaners, not by archivists, but by a small, trusted team assigned to organize the Duke of Edinburgh's personal items after his passing. A task that requires not only precision but deep respect. Imagine the atmosphere. A quiet room. Drawers open, books stacked, old folders laid gently across a table. Windows slightly cracked to let in the soft, filtered light of a London morning. The smell of old paper, polished wood, and time. This room wasn't grand. Not the ballroom, not the picture gallery, not the audience chamber. Just one of Philip's private spaces. A study he used when he wanted to work alone, think clearly, or simply step away from the overwhelming choreography of royal life. A room filled with personal artifacts that didn't belong to the institution, but to the man. The team had been sorting through items methodically for hours. Old notebooks, receipts from decades ago, military documents, handwritten reminders, photographs tucked between pages of books. The kind of deeply personal objects that reveal a person's life in fragments rather than polished stories. It was slow work, careful work. Then something unusual happened. One of the workers, someone from the small, highly vetted circle trusted with Philip's personal belongings, noticed a thin wooden box wedged behind a row of books. A box that didn't match the others. Smaller, simpler, almost hidden. At first, they assumed it was nothing. Philip wasn't sentimental about decorative items, but something about the way the box sat, slightly angled, as if deliberately placed, caught the person's eye. They reached for it. It didn't lift easily. The books seemed arranged to hold it in place, as though someone wanted it tucked away, not merely stored. They slid the box out slowly, careful not to damage the shelf. And when they opened it, they realized they were looking at something Philip had clearly not meant to be seen casually. Inside were several envelopes, all sealed, all dated, some addressed to individuals, some marked private, some with nothing written on them at all. But one envelope stood out immediately. It was thicker, more formal, sealed with a wax crest. The imprint unmistakably Philip's, sharp-edged, firm, precise. And there, in Philip's handwriting, were the words, "To be opened only after my passing." That was the moment everything changed. Try to imagine being the person holding that envelope. The weight of it. Not physical weight, but emotional weight. The sense that you're holding a message intended to be powerful, personal, and revealing. Do you open it immediately? Do you hesitate? Do you call someone? Do you wait for instructions? According to accounts, there was silence at first. A long silence. The kind where everyone feels the tension, but no one speaks. Finally, the most senior person in the room made the call. This envelope was not to be opened privately. It needed witnesses, people in positions of trust, people who could confirm what was inside without misunderstanding. So word was sent quietly. A small number of high-ranking individuals arrived. No reporters. No cameras. No staff members who might talk. Just a handful of people who knew Prince Philip well enough to understand the seriousness of what was about to happen. The envelope was placed on a table. Everyone stood around it. Not too close, not too far. The atmosphere was thick, but strangely calm. Someone asked the obvious question. Are we sure this is meant for us to open? There was a pause. Then another voice answered. It says after his passing. He is gone. And this was meant to be found. It's easy to forget that behind every royal protocol, there are human beings experiencing human emotions. Nervousness, curiosity, respect, even fear. Because when you open a letter written by a man like Prince Philip, a man known for choosing his words carefully, for meaning what he said, for not leaving things unsaid or unclear, you know the message inside will be deliberate. There was no ceremony, no dramatic tearing. Just a slow, steady opening as the seal snapped apart. The paper inside was folded neatly, just once. Philip's handwriting covered nearly the entire page. And before anyone read it aloud, the room was quiet enough to hear a clock ticking from somewhere down the hall. The first line was straightforward. A greeting, a note of thanks, a small message of appreciation to the people he trusted. The second line changed everything. It read, "This letter exists to clarify my private wishes regarding certain personal assets of sentimental and financial value." Personal assets, financial value, not state property, not ceremonial items. His own possessions, the things that belonged to Philip the man, not Philip the royal figure. The next sentences were even more direct, unexpectedly direct. I wish to grant William access to these personal assets. I do not wish for Harry to have access to them. If the room had been silent before, it became something even heavier now, a kind of stunned stillness. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. Everyone knew what this meant. You have to remember, private letters from royal family members rarely contain such blunt lines. They are diplomatic, gentle, filling space with polite language even when delivering firm decisions. But this was unmistakable. Prince Philip hadn't left room for interpretation. He hadn't softened the message. He hadn't added explanatory paragraphs or apologies. He simply stated his decision, clearly, firmly, intentionally. The next line was a brief explanation, but not a full one. Not yet. It was more of a hint than a justification. A sentence that didn't answer the question, but raised 100 more. I have made this decision with careful consideration and in alignment with what I believe is necessary for the stability and continuity of the family's future. Stability and continuity. Words Philip used often in speeches about duty and the crown, but here they took on a personal meaning. Because this decision wasn't about public duty. It wasn't about appearances. It wasn't about ceremonial expectations. It was about something he felt privately, deeply, something that aligned with his instincts as a patriarch, the role he often embraced behind the scenes. Imagine the expressions in the room as those words were read aloud. Surprise, hesitation, shock even. Not because they doubted Philip, but because the letter raised a much deeper and more pressing question. What did Prince Philip see coming? Was it about Harry's choices? His struggles? His relationship with the institution? His move away from royal duties? Or was it something Philip had sensed long before the public ever noticed anything changing? That's the mystery that began right there in that room. But the most surprising part wasn't even on the first page. The letter continued. And what came next would complicate everything even further. Because Prince Philip didn't just name William. He didn't just exclude Harry. He referenced an event, a moment from the past, that he believed shaped his final decision. A moment no one expected him to mention. And that moment, as we'll explore, holds the key to understanding everything Philip feared, everything he hoped for, and everything he believed was at stake. Every family has a moment that becomes a turning point. A moment no one talks about publicly, yet everyone remembers privately. For the royal family, one of those moments involved Prince Philip watching his grandsons closely, quietly, and with an attention sharper than anyone realized at the time. It was years ago, long before the world imagined Harry would ever step away from royal life. Long before documentaries, interviews, controversies, or dramatic headlines. This was the 1990s. A decade marked by change, tension, and uncertainty inside the monarchy. A decade when Prince Philip, perhaps more than anyone, understood that the next generation needed guidance, and needed it early. But before we dive into that moment, you have to understand something about how Philip viewed children, especially royal children. Most people think of him as stern, strict, old-fashioned. And yes, he was those things sometimes. But he also believed deeply in shaping character early. He believed children reveal who they will become not through grand achievements, but through small decisions, small reactions, moments when no one else is paying attention. Philip watched William and Harry closely, not in a controlling way, but in a protective one. He wanted to understand them, their strengths, their weaknesses, their instincts, because one day, one of those boys would stand at the center of the monarchy, and the other would stand just outside it. Philip cared about both roles, both responsibilities, both futures, but he also understood something fundamental. Some people are shaped by duty, some are shaped by emotion, and sometimes those paths lead in very different directions. The moment that shaped his thinking happened during a quiet weekend at Balmoral. Balmoral Castle, a place where the royals drop their shoulders, breathe a little deeper, and step away from the strict choreography of public life. The air is colder, crisper. The hills roll endlessly. Everything feels slower, clearer. It was during one of those famous summer stays. The boys were young, old enough to argue, young enough to forget they were being watched. That day, William and Harry were playing outside with a few members of the family. There were bikes, footballs, and that energetic chaos that only siblings can create. At some point, a small disagreement broke out. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just a typical moment between brothers. But what happened next caught Prince Philip's eye. William stepped back, looked around, and tried to solve the problem calmly. Harry reacted quickly, emotionally, passionately, and stormed away. Now, on the surface, that's normal. Kids argue. Kids get annoyed. Kids run off. Everyone knows that. But Philip wasn't watching the moment. He was watching the pattern. Because this wasn't the first time Harry acted from emotion, or the second, or the third. This was something he'd seen forming for years, a tendency to rush, to react, to feel first and think second. Philip didn't judge him for it. He didn't criticize him. He understood that every child grows differently. But he also knew that royal life requires decisions made with clarity, not impulse. That day, after Harry stormed off, William went to find him. Not because anyone asked him to. Not because he felt obligated. He did it because he sensed responsibility. A responsibility that went beyond sibling care. A responsibility Philip recognized instinctively. William found Harry sitting by a tree, frustrated, kicking at loose stones. The conversation wasn't recorded. No one wrote it down. But those who witnessed it said William knelt beside him quietly, waited, and then spoke calmly. Not like a child comforting another child, but like someone who understood leadership even at a young age. Philip watched from a distance, noticing everything, saying nothing. Later that evening, during one of those quiet family dinners, Philip made a comment. Casual on the surface, meaningful underneath. He said, "Character shows early. When it matters, responsibility reveals itself." No one thought much of it at the time. But Philip wasn't talking about responsibility in general. He was talking about William and Harry, and the differences forming between them. From that moment on, Philip paid closer attention. Not because he wanted to choose between the boys. He loved both. But because he knew one day he might have to make decisions that required clear understanding, not emotional favoritism. That Balmoral moment became the first piece of a puzzle Philip kept in his mind for years. A puzzle about the future of the monarchy, the future of the family, and the future of his personal legacy. But there was another moment, years later, that solidified his thinking. It happened after William and Harry were older, teenagers, more aware of their public roles, more conscious of being watched. It was a private lunch, one of those simple gatherings the public never hears about. Philip asked the boys a simple question. What do you think is the hardest part of responsibility? William thought for a moment before answering. Harry answered immediately. William's answer was measured, thoughtful, balanced. He said something along the lines of, responsibility means doing what's needed even when you don't want to, even when no one is watching. Harry's answer was different. According to someone who overheard, he said something like, responsibility is pressure. Too much of it. I don't know why people pretend it's noble. Neither answer was wrong. Neither was immature. Both reflected honesty. But to Philip, those answers revealed something deeper. William saw responsibility as duty. Harry saw it as burden. Philip didn't judge Harry for feeling that way. After all, not everyone is meant to carry the same weight. But he stored that moment away, adding it to the growing pattern. Because Philip had lived long enough to understand something many people ignore. People don't radically change who they are. They become more of who they already were. The years passed. The world changed. The boys became young men. And slowly, Harry's emotional instincts sharpened. His reactions became stronger. His frustrations more visible. His pull away from royal life became clearer, though at the time, most people didn't notice. Philip noticed. Every quiet disagreement. Every moment Harry looked uncomfortable in the spotlight. Every sign that he might one day choose his own path, even if that path led far away from the institution. And then, that path became reality. The interviews, the departure, the statements, the frustrations, the decisions that shocked the world. Philip wasn't angry about it. He wasn't surprised by it. He had predicted it years earlier, quietly, without fanfare, without voicing it. Because he understood something others didn't. Harry was never meant for the same kind of burden William was destined to carry. And that brings us to the moment Philip made the decision that would eventually be written into the sealed letter. It didn't happen quickly. It didn't happen emotionally. It happened over years, shaped by observations, conversations, and the evolving dynamics of the family. Philip wasn't choosing favorites. He wasn't punishing anyone. He was simply acknowledging what he believed to be true. William would stay. Harry would eventually leave. And for that reason, Philip wanted his personal possessions, the things that mattered to him privately, to go to the grandson he believed would remain connected to the family, the legacy, and the traditions he valued. But there was something else, something almost no one realizes. Philip didn't make this decision alone. There was a conversation, a private one, between Philip and another senior family member. A conversation that confirmed what Philip already suspected. And that conversation, once revealed, would challenge everything people thought they knew about the royal family's internal dynamics. So let's return to that tiny envelope sitting on the polished mahogany table inside Buckingham Palace. Imagine it again. Not the outside of it, but the inside. What words could possibly be written on paper so old it carried the faint scent of the 20th century itself? What could make senior royal staff look at each other with widened eyes, unsure whether to speak or stay silent? What could make one message from a grandfather shake the foundation of two brothers who had already been pushed to opposite ends of the world? These are big questions, and the only way to explore them is to understand the emotional terrain behind the moment. Because the truth is this: sealed letters don't just contain ink. They contain decisions made in private, thoughts whispered into the future, and intentions the world was never meant to hear. They carry a kind of emotional electricity. Prince Philip was famous for his straightforwardness. He didn't do vague. He didn't do overly sentimental. But he did do foresight. He planned. He prepared. He anticipated problems before they erupted into headlines. Which leads to the quiet but powerful question. Did Philip see something happening between William and Harry long before the rest of us did? Many royal experts have said yes. Some claim he noticed a shift in Harry's behavior years before Harry himself recognized it. Others believe Philip recognized William's future challenges, not just as a brother, but as a man destined to carry the weight of 1,000 years of monarchy on his shoulders. Think about it. Being heir isn't just a title. It's a responsibility so large that even the strongest shoulders can tremble under it. William's role wasn't simply to be king one day. It was to keep the institution stable, steady, and trustworthy in a world that changes by the minute. And Philip knew that stability needed resources. Not just money, influence, legacy, security, the kind of support only a personal fortune could provide. But here's the twist that suddenly makes everything more complicated. Philip also loved Harry deeply. He was the grandfather who quietly slipped into the background of family photos, but somehow anchored everyone with his steady presence. So why, then, would a sealed letter name only William as the one with access to his personal fortune? That is the question that turns this from a simple inheritance story into a deeper emotional and strategic puzzle. Was it about trust? Was it about the throne? Was it about foresight? Or was it about something that happened privately? Something the public never saw? The more you think about it, the more you realize this letter isn't just a financial decision. It's a message from a man who understood legacy more than almost anyone alive. But legacy is complicated, emotional, strategic, sometimes painful. And this is where the story gets even more intriguing. To understand the contents of Philip's sealed letter, we have to step back into the years before his passing. The quiet years. The ones where public photos didn't reveal the whole story. We have to walk into the private moments between grandfather and grandsons. We have to examine the conversations whispered in corridors royals rarely speak about. We have to revisit the tension that slowly formed between two brothers once described as inseparable. Because Philip wasn't writing to strangers. He was writing to family. Family he'd watched grow, struggle, argue, hope, laugh, worry, and change. And sometimes, the hardest decisions are made not because someone stopped caring, but because they cared too much. Let's rewind for a moment. Picture Harry in his early 20s. Loud laughter, mischievous grin, a spark in his eyes. He was the free spirit of the royals, the one unafraid to break tradition, to challenge the system from within. Philip, despite his famously strict demeanor, understood this kind of personality. After all, in his youth, Philip himself was considered rebellious, bold, and unpredictable. William, on the other hand, carried a different weight. The kind of seriousness that comes not from personality, but from destiny. While Harry sprinted ahead, William walked with deliberation, always aware he was being watched. Philip saw both boys clearly, not as future headlines, but as future men. So imagine him sitting at a desk in his study, evening light pouring through tall windows. A quiet moment of reflection. He opens a drawer, takes out a fresh piece of stationery, the kind only he used. He begins to write. He thinks about tradition. He thinks about duty. He thinks about the long-term survival of the monarchy. He thinks about his grandsons, their personalities, their paths, their futures. And slowly, line by line, he forms a message he knows cannot be shared while he's alive. A message that must be read only after he's gone, when emotions have settled and clarity is possible. But why seal it? Why hide it? Why leave a letter instead of saying it directly? Perhaps the answer lies in something incredibly human. Honesty is often easier on paper. And perhaps Philip feared that speaking his truth face-to-face would hurt one grandson while helping another. Sometimes people write letters when their hearts are filled with truths too delicate to speak aloud. So he sealed it. He tucked it away. And he left it for a future he knew would come. But here's where curiosity spikes again, because sealing the letter wasn't the dramatic part. Opening it was. Imagine being the staff member who first saw the envelope being placed on the table. Imagine the quiet tension in the room as senior aides gathered, waiting for someone to break the silence. Imagine someone finally sliding a finger beneath the seal. Imagine the soft sound of paper opening. What would you expect to read? A warm message? A reflection on life? A private goodbye to his grandsons? What they found instead was unexpected, direct, sharp, and deeply intentional. It wasn't pages and pages of explanation. Philip didn't waste words. The message was concise but powerful, and in it, he named William as the one with access to his personal fortune. Not shared, not divided, not conditional. One heir, one message, one decision. And that single decision sparked an emotional storm behind palace doors. Some said it was strategic. Some said it was protective. Some said it was a message to the monarchy itself. But others whispered a different theory, that Philip saw something coming. Something about the family. Something about the future. Something about Harry's path that made him nervous. And that theory has only grown louder with time. Because when you look at the timeline, the events fit together in ways that raise eyebrows. Drama didn't appear out of thin air. Tensions didn't erupt overnight. Distance didn't form instantly. There were signs, signals Philip may have noticed long before anyone else did. Which leaves us with one final question before we step into Chapter 1. Was Philip's letter a judgment? Or a prediction? And more importantly, if he truly believed the monarchy's stability depended on William having access to his fortune, what did he fear might happen if Harry had access instead? It started with a sound so small, so ordinary, you might not even notice it in daily life. The soft metallic click of a drawer sliding open. But inside the palace that morning, that sound was anything but ordinary. That was the moment everything began. The dawn outside Buckingham Palace was unusually quiet. A thin veil of mist drifted across the courtyard, rolling over cobblestones like a ghost slowly waking from sleep. Inside the private wing, however, the air felt heavy, weighted, expectant, as if even the walls knew something was about to happen. A senior aide, one who had worked closely with Prince Philip for years, was cataloging personal items, carefully going through every drawer, every envelope, every document. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Just methodical movement in a room that still seemed to carry Philip's presence. And then it happened. Tucked beneath a stack of meticulously folded handkerchiefs, the aide's fingers brushed against an unfamiliar texture. Smooth, stiff, a sealed envelope. He paused. He pulled it out carefully, almost reverently. It was cream-colored, old but preserved, and sealed with a dark red wax stamp. The kind of wax that had cooled slowly, leaving the faint swirl of an imprint. No label, no date, no visible hint of what was inside. Only one thing stood out, Philip's handwriting on the front. Just 10 words. For my grandsons. To be opened after my passing. The aide's breath hitched, and not because of the words alone, but because the handwriting was unmistakable. Philip's signature script, strong and disciplined even in old age. He froze for a moment, understanding instantly the gravity of what he held. This wasn't an ordinary letter. This wasn't a standard document. This felt intentional, personal, heavy, and it was sealed. What do you do when you find a sealed letter from someone whose life shaped an entire generation? Someone who understood duty, responsibility, and foresight better than almost anyone alive. You hold your breath. You steady your hands. You ask yourself a single question. What did he want them to know now that he was gone? But the aide didn't open it. Not immediately. Protocol demanded witnesses. Protocol demanded procedure. Protocol demanded time. So he did what royal aides have done for centuries when fate lands in their hands. He notified the next in line. Within minutes, a small group of senior staff members gathered quietly in the room. No announcement. No commotion. Just silent steps muffled by thick carpets. Faces composed, yet eyes unmistakably curious. They formed a semicircle around the polished desk where the envelope was carefully placed. The room felt suddenly smaller. Tighter. As if even the air leaned in to listen. Everyone stared at the letter. No one touched it. Until one of the senior aides, the one with authority to handle personal documents, stepped forward. He reached out slowly, placing 2 fingers on the envelope to steady it. He glanced at the others, silently asking for permission. They nodded once. He broke the wax seal. It didn't crack loudly. It didn't crumble dramatically. It released with a quiet snap, a soft sound that somehow echoed in everyone's chest. A pause. He slid out the letter. A single sheet. Handwritten. Short. Firm. Direct. He read it once to himself. His eyebrows lifted, not in shock, but in the kind of recognition that comes when pieces of a puzzle suddenly fall into place. Then he read it again. And again. Silence stretched, growing heavier, thicker, almost suffocating. Finally, one of the staff whispered, "Well, what does it say?" The aide didn't answer immediately. He swallowed, the paper trembling slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from the weight of what was written. And then, with a calm voice masking the magnitude of the moment, he read, "To my grandson William, I grant access to the personal funds I have set aside. Use them wisely, and with the family's long-term stability in mind." He lowered the letter. Silence. One of the other aides blinked. Only William. No one else spoke. Not yet. They were still absorbing it. A letter from Prince Philip naming only William, and not Harry, as the one with access to his personal fortune. A decision that, on paper, seemed simple but carried emotional, symbolic, and strategic implications far beyond a line of text. Inside the room, the tension shifted. Not anger, not judgment, just a wave of quiet realization. Everyone knew Philip was decisive. Everyone knew he understood the complicated dynamics of his family. But this letter added a layer no one expected. A layer that raised more questions than answers. Why William? Why not both grandsons? Why frame it as a message addressed to my grandsons if the content only empowered one of them? What was Philip trying to communicate? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why leave this message sealed? Before anyone could offer a theory, one of the aides spoke again, softer this time. Do we tell them? The question didn't refer to procedure. That part was clear. The question was human, emotional, because delivering this message wouldn't be simple. It wouldn't be routine. It wouldn't be neutral. You don't just send a message like this and expect it to pass quietly. You don't tell two brothers that their grandfather left them a farewell message, and that message contains a decision that affects only one of them, without expecting ripples, maybe even waves. The room felt colder now. The mist outside had thickened, pushing against the windows as if trying to listen in. Two brothers, two futures, one letter. Everyone knew they had to proceed. So they prepared protocol documents. They rehearsed wording. They considered timing. They carefully drafted who would be told first, and by whom, and in what tone. Because for a family where every gesture, every glance, every pause becomes public conversation, this would require a delicate approach. But the aides also knew something else. This letter wasn't just a document. It was a spark, and sparks can light up the darkness or set everything ablaze. Later that afternoon, the letter was placed into a secure envelope and carried down a long, quiet corridor toward a private sitting room where Prince William had been scheduled to stop by. The footsteps of the courier echoed softly, tap, 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 a rhythmic reminder of the weight he carried in his hand. But before we follow the letter into William's hands, we have to understand something that the palace aides understood as well. Philip's decisions rarely came without context. This letter didn't drop out of the sky. It wasn't created randomly. It wasn't impulsive. It was rooted in years of observations, conversations, and quiet reflections that the public never saw. Decades of watching two boys grow into two men walking very different roads. The question wasn't just, why William? The question was, what had Philip seen? What had he believed? What had he anticipated? Because decisions like this don't form overnight. They grow. They accumulate. They crystallize. And now, with the letter about to reach William, the first hints of Philip's reasoning were about to reveal themselves. Except, as fate often has it, nothing in the royal world moves in a straight line. Not letters. Not reactions. Not relationships. Because as the letter traveled silently down the corridor toward William, someone else was about to find out it existed. Someone who was not scheduled to be part of this moment. Someone whose reaction would change the experience completely. It should have been simple. A private letter. A quiet delivery. A controlled moment. That was the plan. But the palace, especially the private wing, has its own rhythm. People walk in and out. Doors open at unexpected times. Conversations drift. Footsteps echo at unpredictable intervals. What was meant to be a smooth, silent delivery took a turn before anyone realized the moment had changed. It began with a door that wasn't supposed to open. The courier carrying the sealed envelope walked steadily down the narrow corridor leading toward the family sitting room. His grip was firm. His steps were calm. He rehearsed the protocol silently in his head. Enter. Announce the letter. Present it. Leave promptly. Everything was timed. Everything was planned. But halfway down that corridor, just as he approached the carved double doors leading to the sitting room, one of the doors swung open unexpectedly with a soft hinge creak. The courier froze. Standing there, framed by the doorway, was Prince Harry. Yes, Harry. Not scheduled. Not expected. Not part of the carefully prepared plan. He hadn't come for a meeting. He hadn't been called in. He hadn't even been on the internal schedule board that staff updated every morning. He had come for something simple. A forgotten jacket. The courier blinked, his breath catching for a second, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he knew instantly that the delicate timing had just been disrupted. Harry didn't look tense. He didn't look upset. He didn't look suspicious. If anything, he looked normal, relaxed, like someone walking into a room he'd stepped into hundreds of times since childhood. He gave the courier a polite nod, that familiar half-smile that didn't always reach his eyes. "Morning," he said lightly. The courier swallowed. "Good morning, sir." Harry stepped aside to let him pass, assuming the courier was on some ordinary duty. But the courier didn't move, because Harry's eyes, casually at first, drifted downward. And he saw it. The envelope. Cream cardstock. Red wax seal broken. Philip's handwriting visible through the courier's transparent document pouch. Harry's expression didn't shift dramatically. It didn't twist in shock or panic. But it did change, subtly, unmistakably. A flicker. A pause. A tightening around the eyes. The kind of micro-expression that reveals understanding before words do. "What's that?" Harry asked softly, his tone still polite, but now edged with curiosity. It would have been easier if he sounded angry, or blunt, or emotional, but he didn't. He sounded calm, almost too calm. The courier exhaled carefully. He had been trained for this. Unexpected encounters, accidental disclosures, uneasy timing. "A document for the Prince of Wales, sir," he said respectfully. Harry looked at the envelope again, then back at the courier, then again at the envelope. The silence stretched just long enough to become noticeable. For years, Harry had trained himself to read palace movements. He knew when something was routine and when something wasn't. And nothing about this moment felt routine. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He didn't challenge. Instead, he simply stepped aside, his expression thoughtful. "I'll let you go on then," he said quietly. The courier nodded, stepped forward, and passed through the open doorway. Harry watched him walk away. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. He didn't move. He didn't call after the courier. He didn't ask another question. But his eyes followed the envelope the entire time. Something within him, perhaps instinct, perhaps experience, had ignited. Something that whispered, "That letter matters." As the courier disappeared around the corner, Harry remained in the doorway, the mist from outside drifting toward him like a ghost brushing past his shoulder. He didn't chase the letter. He didn't try to stop its delivery. But as he turned to retrieve his jacket from a nearby coat stand, he paused again. He stood still, very still, because that handwriting was unmistakable. He recognized his grandfather's script. He had received countless notes from Philip over the years, clipped, dry, sometimes humorous, always precise. Seeing that handwriting again felt like a quiet jolt to the chest, a memory pressing a finger directly against his heart. A sealed letter from Philip, opened after Philip's passing, heading toward William. The timing, the secrecy, the atmosphere in the corridor, the courier's cautious tone. Harry wasn't someone who jumped to conclusions. But he wasn't naive either. He'd grown up in this institution. He understood the difference between ceremonial letters and personal messages. And this one was personal. Deeply. He lifted his jacket from the stand and held it for a moment, his eyes drifting once more toward the corridor where the courier had disappeared. Something about this moment felt off. Not wrong. Not threatening. Just significant. And significance in the royal world usually comes with consequences. Harry slipped on the jacket slowly. His mind was turning, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in curiosity. He wondered, was it a farewell letter? A reflection? A message meant for both brothers? A private memory Philip had chosen to share? Memories rise unexpectedly. And as Harry stood alone in the doorway, a memory flickered in his mind, a moment from years ago. He was young, maybe 12 or 13. He had been sitting with Philip in a small garden behind Balmoral. Harry had been frustrated, some school issue, some feeling of being overshadowed, something he couldn't quite articulate at the time. Philip had placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You and William are different for a reason. One stabilizes. One disrupts. Both are necessary. Both are necessary." The words floated through Harry's mind now, like a ghost resurfacing at the perfect, or perhaps imperfect, moment. Was the letter connected to that message from years ago? Had Philip left something for both of them? Or had he left something only for William? Harry tightened his grip on the jacket sleeve, the question lingering as he stepped back fully into the hallway. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He wasn't upset. Not yet. But he was alert. Very alert. As the echo of the courier's footsteps faded into the distance, Harry turned, walked down the corridor in the opposite direction, and exhaled slowly. The palace was calm again. Silent. Still. But something in the balance had shifted, and Harry felt it. Meanwhile, down the opposite corridor, the courier finally reached the sitting room where Prince William was waiting. William stood near the tall window, sunlight catching the edge of his profile. He looked tired, not physically, but with the kind of heaviness that settles on someone whose life is made up of responsibilities more than choices. When the courier entered, William looked up, offering a polite nod. "Sir," the courier said, extending the envelope. William accepted it with a quiet thanks. He didn't open it immediately. He studied it first, the handwriting, the weight, the significance of the seal. He felt something stir inside him. Something quiet, something emotional, something private. He inhaled, bracing himself, and finally slid the letter open to read the contents. But just as his eyes landed on the first line, a knock echoed from the hallway. 3 knocks. Firm, purposeful, familiar. William looked up. The door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Harry. Not angry, not demanding, not dramatic, just present, at precisely the wrong, or right, moment. William froze. Harry stepped into the room, closing the door behind him gently. His eyes flicked to the envelope in William's hands. Then back to William. A small, unreadable smile tugged at his mouth. "Looks like grandfather left us something," Harry said quietly. And that was the moment, the exact moment. The story changed direction. Because the letter was no longer private. The timing was no longer controlled. The moment was no longer simple. 2 brothers. 1 letter. 1 decision from a man who understood them both more than they knew. Harry stepped closer. William tightened his grip on the paper. And the quiet tension between them, dormant for months, flickered back to life. The room felt smaller the moment Harry stepped inside. It was as if the air thickened, stretched tight like a drum skin, ready to vibrate with even the softest touch. William stood near the window, the letter half open in his hand. Harry lingered just inside the doorway, one hand on the doorknob, as if he wasn't sure whether he should commit to walking forward or step back into the safety of the corridor. Neither spoke. For a long moment, there were only 3 things in the room: William, Harry, and the letter between them. Finally, Harry took a slow breath and released the doorknob, letting the door click shut behind him. "I saw the envelope in the hallway," he said quietly, his tone calm but edged with something deeper. "I recognized grandfather's handwriting." William nodded once. "I thought you might have." Silence again. Not an angry silence. Not even a tense one. More like a silence built from years of shared history. The kind that carries unsaid words, unfinished conversations, unanswered questions. Harry stepped closer, hands in the pockets of his jacket. "You opened it?" "Just now," William answered. "I didn't expect." He stopped, catching himself before the sentence pushed into dangerous territory. He didn't expect Harry to walk in. He didn't expect the timing to collide. He didn't expect this moment, a private one, to become shared. Harry nodded slowly. "Can I?" He gestured lightly toward the letter. William hesitated. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but Harry saw it. Then William folded the letter gently, holding it between both hands. "Let me read it aloud." He didn't phrase it as a question. He didn't phrase it as an offer. It was a decision. Harry's expression didn't crack, but something behind his eyes dimmed slightly. Not hurt, not anger, just the quiet acceptance that this moment wasn't his to lead. "All right," Harry said. William unfolded the letter again and began to read, his voice steady, almost formal. "To my grandson William, I grant access to the personal funds I have set aside. Use them wisely and with the family's long-term stability in mind." That was it. 1 sentence, 1 decision, 1 name. The letter felt heavier than the words on it. Harry didn't react immediately. He didn't flinch or frown or force a smile. He just stood there, absorbing the message, letting the meaning wash over him slowly. Finally, he exhaled. "Just you then," Harry said softly. William didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because there was no simple response. "It appears so," William finally said. Harry nodded again, this time more tightly. And he didn't explain why. "No," William replied. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. This silence pulsed with unspoken emotions, ones that the brothers had skillfully avoided for years. Harry walked toward a small table near the sofa, and ran his fingers lightly across its edge. Something in him seemed to retreat inward, as if he were searching for calm words instead of impulsive ones. "It's odd," Harry said quietly. "He always treated us evenly when we were children." William looked down at the letter. Even treatment doesn't always mean identical choices. Harry's jaw tightened just a little. "Do you think he trusted you more?" William lifted his head. "This isn't about trust, isn't it?" Harry asked, turning toward him. There it was. Not anger, but curiosity sharpened by years of comparison. William set the letter gently on the side table. "Harry, you know grandfather saw the family system differently from how we see it." "I know," Harry said, "but a sealed letter? A private message? Only to one of us. That feels intentional." "It was intentional," William said simply. "Everything he did was intentional." Harry paced slowly toward the window. The mist outside swirled against the glass, soft and pale like a giant breath clouding the world beyond. "Did you know anything about this?" Harry asked. "No," William answered. "I had no idea." Harry studied him for a long moment, trying to detect any hint of dishonesty. But William wasn't lying. His posture, his voice, his eyes, everything about him was steady, truthful. "Strange," Harry murmured. "He used to write me letters too, you know? Not many, but enough to know he cared." "I know he cared," William replied. "About both of us." Harry stopped pacing. He placed a hand on the window frame and leaned forward slightly, staring at the pale sky beyond. "Then why leave something only for you?" he asked softly. William didn't have an answer. Not yet. Not one he was confident in. Not one he wanted to say aloud. Harry pressed gently. "Do you want to take a guess?" William inhaled slowly, gathering his thoughts before speaking. "Maybe," he began. He saw this as a responsibility rather than a reward. Harry didn't turn around. "Meaning?" William hesitated again. "Meaning he expected me to take on certain roles he believed would require resources." "Resources," Harry repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "For the family's stability." "Yes." Harry finally turned to face him, his expression surprisingly calm. "William, look, I'm not angry." William studied him carefully, unsure. "I'm not," Harry repeated. "I'm not upset with you. I'm not jealous. I just want to understand." William nodded slowly. "So do I." Harry's eyes softened. He wasn't looking at a future king. He was looking at his brother, the boy he grew up chasing around the gardens, the teenager he played games with in the hallway, the young man he once leaned on when life became too heavy. This moment wasn't about rivalry. It wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't even about money. It was about meaning. "What do you think he meant by family stability?" Harry asked quietly. William rubbed the bridge of his nose. "He might have meant the monarchy. He might have meant the broader family. Or he might have meant," he paused. "Us," Harry finished for him. William didn't deny it. Harry exhaled, stepping away from the window. "So what now? Do you want me to leave you alone with it?" William looked up sharply. "No, you're part of this too, even if the letter only mentions me." Harry blinked, surprised. William continued. "Grandfather wouldn't have written something so targeted unless he had a larger purpose in mind. I think," he stopped again, picking his words carefully. "I think this letter is only the beginning." "The beginning of what?" Harry asked. William shook his head. "I'm not sure yet." Harry took a few slow steps closer to the letter, then stopped in front of the table where it rested. He didn't touch it. He simply looked at it, as if trying to read past the words on the paper. "I wonder," he murmured, "if he left anything else." William stiffened. "You think there might be more?" Harry shrugged lightly. "Grandfather wasn't a man of single messages. If he wanted you to have access to something as serious as personal funds, I doubt he'd leave no explanation at all." William swallowed. The idea made sense. Too much sense. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. Harry looked up, his eyes steady and clear. "I think," he said slowly, "that this letter isn't the whole story." A soft knock echoed in the hallway. Both brothers turned. The door opened gently, and the same senior aide who discovered the letter stepped inside. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a flicker of urgency. "Your Royal Highnesses," the aide said. "There is something else you need to see." William straightened. Harry's eyebrows lifted. The aide hesitated, then stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "It appears," he said carefully, "that the letter we found earlier was only the first." Harry exchanged a look with William. The aide reached into a leather folio and produced another envelope, this one larger. Sealed. Unopened. Stamped with Philip's wax crest. This, the aide said, was discovered just minutes ago in one of the Duke's private document boxes. And it is addressed. He swallowed. To both of you. The room fell silent. Completely silent. Harry stared. William stared. The envelope pulsed with potential. A message for both brothers. A second message. A deeper one. A hidden one. And as the aide placed the envelope gently onto the table beside the first letter, the air in the room crackled with tension. William stepped closer. Harry did too. Two brothers. Two letters. One truth waiting to be revealed. The palace had long survived on carefully controlled silence. Polished speeches, immaculate photo ops, and tightly sealed envelopes that held more weight than any headline. But this envelope, the one Prince Philip supposedly left behind, wasn't just another relic. It wasn't a ceremonial note or a sentimental family message. It was something different, something sharper, something meant to be found only when he was no longer here to explain or to defend it. And that's what makes this moment so startling. Imagine standing in a room filled with history. Portraits staring down, clocks ticking in that old, slow rhythm that only castles seem to have, and suddenly realizing that one handwritten line from a man who rarely wasted words could shift everything. Not just money, not just inheritance, but loyalty, legacy, position, identity. Because that is what this story is really about. Not fortune, but favor. Not wealth, but warning. Why would Prince Philip, known for his blunt honesty and lifelong duty, leave a message that names one grandson and not the other? And why would the palace do everything possible to bury every rumor of this letter until now? Ask yourself, what was he protecting? Who was he protecting? And from what? These questions didn't start today. They've lived quietly in royal watch circles for years. Whispers, hints, the occasional off-the-record comment from someone who once polished a frame or served tea in an adjoining room. But once the sealed envelope was opened, those whispers turned into echoes. And those echoes are now becoming unavoidable. This is where the story turns. Because as the letter's contents trickled beyond the palace walls, a little here, a little there, it became clear that this wasn't just about access to a personal fortune. It was a message written with intention, with precision, with concern. A message that some believe Prince Philip meant for the world to understand, eventually. But here's the twist. What if the world was never supposed to see it this soon? Let's go deeper. Prince Philip was known for reading people, really reading them, in a way that unnerved some and impressed others. He could spot weakness, ambition, sincerity, or performance in a single conversation. Some called it sharp intuition. Others called it military discipline. But almost everyone agreed. Philip didn't misjudge character. So if he left a message separating William and Harry, then in his mind, there must have been a reason. A reason he saw clearly. A reason he believed mattered long after he was gone. And that question, that reason, is where the real tension begins. Because nothing in the royal family happens accidentally. Everything is part of a thread, a pattern, a decision shaping the next one. So as we peel back the layers of this hidden letter, we're not just exploring Philip's final words. We're exploring a ripple that moves outward, to Charles, to William, to Harry, to the entire monarchy and its future. And the timing? That's the most unsettling part. Why now? Why? At this particular moment, after all the distance, the interviews, the headlines, the accusations, the years of strained relationships, would a sealed letter surface? Who allowed it? Who wanted it seen? And who desperately wanted it buried? Wherever the truth lies, one thing is undeniable. This letter has forced a conversation the palace never wanted to have publicly. Because when the envelope opened, so did old wounds. And the divide between the two brothers, already fragile, suddenly felt deeper, more permanent, more intentional. If Philip truly granted William access to something private, personal, and carefully guarded, something denied to Harry, then this wasn't just an inheritance decision. It was a message, a signal, a judgment. And that is exactly why the palace is scrambling. Because the moment the letter surfaced, every assumption about favoritism, trust, and royal succession had to be re-examined, reinterpreted, re-explained. The question becomes, What did Philip see in William that he felt confident in trusting him with something so significant? And what did he fear in Harry that made him withhold it? These are questions the public has wanted answers to for years, but never had the evidence to explore. Until now. Because inside that envelope wasn't just ink on paper. It was a truth Philip carried, quietly, through some of the most turbulent years the monarchy had ever faced. A truth he didn't voice at microphones or in interviews. A truth he didn't deliver in speeches or through palisades. A truth he left behind sealed. And as this truth begins shaping headlines, dividing opinions, and stirring emotions worldwide, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This story is not just about the past. It's about what comes next. Because what is written